I will start this fireside chat with. So thank you for joining us, Suhasini. I have always had too many questions for you. Because myself as a founder, I have, looked up to your journey and looked up at, what you've built. Because while in terms of categories, they may be very, very divergent. You're building a health food brand, I'm building a more indulgent brand. But what stands, what's common is that both of them are brands, first and foremost. And I think there is a very large crossover of consumers who consume both kinds of food, right? Depending on their need states and so on. So with that note, I would like to ask you a few questions I've always had on my mind, and I'm sure some of our audience members also want to hear today. Uh, First and foremost, was it tough, what you've built?
The right answer is it's incredibly tough. And despite sitting here after having had an exit, the honest answer is if I could look at myself 8 years ago, I'm not 100% sure I'd still walk this path despite it being such a successful and meaningful path. It is that hard. So no one's joking when they tell you it's really difficult.
Right. So thank you for being so candid.
I'm sorry.
I think it sort of resonates with a lot of founders. And of course, those who are starting up, it is tough, but it's still worth it, right? That's what I would add to what Suhasini is saying here. But you're not early enough in your journey, and you faced a lot of resistance. We've heard in your interviews that, retailers were not willing to take on a category like yoga bars and saying that, taste will sell more than health and so on and so forth. How did you power through that? That must have been the first threshold that you have to cross, right, for distribution?
I think there are lots of hurdles, right? And I think the sales side of things is one kind of hurdle. But I think you start facing hurdles right from the time you go in to get that funding that you need for your business, and to prove to people that you do have the ambition to build a world-class company. I think it starts from there because I remember in my early conversation when I went to raise money from angels, people would be like, but are you like Martha's Marmalade down the road? And I would look at that person and be like, I have historically had, like such a stellar CV, and the only thing you would see is that, you would compare me to doing a business out of home. So I think you need to break that barrier. You need to tell people that you have audacious goals, that you want to build a really large company, right? I think the other hurdle, of course, is the selling side of things. And here I would say it is immensely beneficial to be a woman because I think we've reached a place in India where people genuinely want to support women entrepreneurs. And I would say that back in the day, if I was a man selling health food, retailers wouldn't have accepted me, but they would just see the passion with which I would say, like, this is the kind of food I'm feeding my mom. She's a vegetarian. She gets no protein. This is the kind of food my sister eats. It's the kind of food we eat at home, and that's what we want to serve consumers. And retailers understand that story. So I would say the only reason they gave us place on the shelf is because of these really passionate, speeches that we gave them. And I think it's incredible where we've come as a country. I think people go out and about to support women. So.
Great. That's actually very good to hear, right? Because you wouldn't expect to hear something like this. You would think that it's tougher, but for you to acknowledge that, it was easier because you were a woman. Now, that brings me to the next question. What was tougher because you were a woman?
I definitely think valuations were tougher. I think, and this is the classic gender question, right? I think women sell more authentic, honest, believable stories. Men find it easier to paint a very large picture and show things larger than they actually are. And there is no right answer. I mean, it plays out the way it plays out when you build out execution for your company. But valuations definitely are better when you sell a larger story. So it was definitely tougher to get a larger valuation.
Got it. And not just valuation, now you've had a successful exit where your company's been acquired. So that brings us to the question that, you seem to be enjoying what you're doing. You're very, very passionate, obviously. You've almost single-handedly created a category. When people want protein bars or they want health bars, they say yoga bar, right? It's almost like Dettol or Xerox or Bonvita for that matter. Why choose to sell out versus, IPO or taking the company ahead further?
So I'm also, I mean, I don't know, I possess the skill of really understanding money really well. I've always had it, even as a kid. Like, I think and sometimes feel like I'm a better, like I picked Tata Alexi when Tata Alexi was 100 rupees. I had a net worth 500 times my earnings
Wow.
because I just understand money, right? And I do believe today, and I'm going to blog about this, I actually think strategic investors are far better. Strategic outcomes are actually more rewarding for a founder because of three reasons. One, the financial outcome of present value of money. It means I get money today, I can reinvest, I can build, I can do so many things with my time. Two, you know that the brand will never die. You're not searching for volume on the stock exchange because your stock has to continuously perform for you to be funded for next rounds of divestment. But today I know that ITC loves this brand and they're going to keep it for 100 years. So as long as my kid's kid is there, they will all know that it was their grandmother who created the brand. That's important to me. And I think, if creating legacy, having that time for yourself to think larger picture, because now you're going to go after how do you build a unicorn next, right? Like, and it gives you time to think about that. I think it's a combination of all of these things.
I think that's awesome. Like, not building for the short term, but taking the route of building a legacy, not just for yourself. I think you've built legacy for most of us here to look up to and, get inspired by your journey. Obviously, this is not bereft of challenges. I just want to understand, like, every day in an entrepreneur's life, there's a high and then there's a low. So what has been the highest high and what has been the lowest low?
It's tough. I think the lowest low was probably when we were, and it's funny, like as people, I think the memory of your lows are far more memorable than the memories of your highs. So ideally, I can't remember the high, but I remember the low because I know that we were running the strategic process and there came a point where we felt like we didn't have a single bid on the table and we ran out of money. So we sat there thinking, we've been doing this for 11 years and it's all come to nothing. So I remember that period just feeling like my heart was going to give way, and I felt that way for a really long period of time. So I remember that, and that's recent memory. I think, and the only recent memory, and I don't know if it's the happiest memory of the business, but I do know that when ITC announced the acquisition of YogaBar, their stock price went up by 2,500 crores on that day.
Wow.
I think it was, and I think people, and I think relationships, right? Like all relationships are important. I think people in ITC were genuinely happy they made that call to buy us. And they communicated it that day in a way that I remember very, very, very nicely. I don't know if it's the happiest, but it's a good memory.
That's awesome. And I'm not hearing wealth creation for herself, right? I'm hearing more like wealth creation for other stakeholders. And I think that's really where purpose is.
No, I don't want to paint a picture that money is not important to me. I
understand, but the way you're putting it, that and it happens to a lot of us as well, right? While people celebrate your funding and they celebrate the revenue milestones and so on, I think entrepreneurs move past those much faster, right?
No, so maybe I should say this. I do think a strategic outcome is also important because the financial outcomes for an entrepreneur are also significantly better.
Yes.
Simply because of the time value of money, and simply because beyond a point, because of the declining cap table, because you always pay out your investors first. So you only take in that additional cash if you can actually bring up the valuation by more than a multiple of 2. So it also is the right time to sell when you figured out that the amount of capital that your business will need to grow distribution is not commensurate with the valuation bump up that you can actually deliver to the business. Now, because I understand money, it was very obvious to me. But yeah, I mean, so financially also, the outcome is also a lot better if you actually do a strategic transaction.
That's quite awesome. That's great to hear. Now, I'll come to, we've all been through a pandemic recently, right? How did you power through that? Because, we're talking about unbreakable, unshakable spirits here. And I'm sure that was one period where a lot of things looked so uncertain. How did you power through that?
So my only memory of the pandemic, and here's my story on that. The day I signed my term sheet for Series B with Elevation, I was delivering a baby in the hospital opposite the Elevation office. So I was literally here, I was signing, and then I was telling Deepak, I'm like, the only reason I'm here to sign today is because I know my hospital is right across the road.
Oh my God.
And so for me, the memory of COVID is primarily the fact that I finally managed to have a child. So obviously that powers every other memory that I have of the business. But I do know that at that point of time, the only sales that was working was our online sale, and our head of online sales decides to quit and join Kellogg.
Oh my God.
But then I pulled my husband into the business, and I think that was beyond that, like, I think my husband is so aggressive. He sold a tech company, so he's just like that, like really aggressive. So I feel like that was the best thing to happen, because after that point, we started operating in a certain kind of aggression that we previously didn't. So that was good for the outcome.
So
of the
best
business.
acqui-hire you made in
Best
the company.
post-acqui hire.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Now, quickly, we have the last 2-3 minutes left. Any advice to women and entrepreneurs in general in this room and outside?
I think there is no better time. I think that's the fundamental line, right? Like and the best companies are actually built during times like this, because you're also building a company with a certain kind of financial mindset and a certain kind of, the fact that capital is not available easily reminds me back of the time when we started. I know that the first dilution, and this is the classic thing, we almost diluted 20% of our company for 75 lakhs. And we are back to times like that. And we still end up with 50% of the company when we sold. But I'm saying that we are back to times where capital is not easily available. It means that you have to get your head around building sustainable businesses. So the best companies will actually come out of now. So there's no better time to build. The government has so many incentives for women. They gave us funding for our factory. We have a millet grant. We have 40 crores of grants sitting in our books, just given to us by the government, and the government is supporting women and women-run businesses. So I think this is a great time to actually be an entrepreneur, and a woman entrepreneur in particular.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing so candidly. Any word of advice for, CXXOs or women in their careers? Because we do have a few people who are, mid-career to senior careers. Anything you've hired and you've navigated through, so many people who you've worked with. What is it that you like to see in women in their careers? And, what is it that you think some of us can do better?
Yeah, I think it's about adopting the things that work for each gender and incorporating that into what works for your job. I think it's important to network. I think it's important to make friends. I think it's important to have those conversations with people to know what's happening in office. I think men are great networkers. I think if you need that, whatever gets the job done, I think it's important to always look at what the other person's doing really well and incorporating that into what works for you. I think women inherently have a lot of strengths because we're emotionally more balanced, we tend to be more honest, more believable, but there are things to learn. So if there was one piece of advice, I think networking can take you really far. It's something I didn't realize in my life early on, but once I caught on to it, I think the benefit of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, the outcome on that is a lot. So if you need to go and take that golf club membership, go and do it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing so candidly and keeping it so simple, right? I mean, most of the Q&A we've had it sounds very simple, but over the course of our interactions outside, we realized that, let's keep it very simple and practical, which all of us can take back and utilize in our journeys. And thank you for being here and sharing all of this so candidly.
No, thank you for having me.